Does anybody else struggle to remember that Sonic 4 even exists? It happens to me all the time, thinking about, like, all the Sonic games or whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah, Sonic 4, I forgot about that. This game, these games, whatever you want to call it, they're just so unmemorable that they slip my mind so easily. Though I think a big part of that is because I've played the Sonic 4 games significantly less than almost any other Sonic game. But before we get into why that is, I want to talk a little bit about Sonic 4 itself, and the discourse around this game, and what this game is, and why it even exists. Because, boy howdy, do a lot of Sonic fans absolutely hate Sonic 4. I remember when the game first came out, and there was all the complaining about the green eyes and the modern Sonic design, and how it doesn't have proper physics, and how it sucks, and it's the worst Sonic game ever, and blah blah blah. But if you've been watching my videos up to this point, then you should probably expect that I'm gonna be a little bit more level-headed about things. I'm not just gonna say this game sucks because it doesn't have accurate 2D Sonic physics. I'm gonna say it sucks for many more reasons than just that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, I'll just say I don't hate Sonic 4. These games aren't offensive to me or anything like that. I think a lot of the negativity directed towards these games is very, very overblown, but as we go forward into the Sonic series, we're gonna see that's actually a very common thing with Sonic games that the community has issues with. I personally find that most of them are nowhere near as bad as people make them out to be. As for why Sonic 4 exists, I think it's pretty obvious to see why. These games are very clearly a direct response to the new Super Mario Bros. Games, right? That's pretty obvious, because the new Super Mario Bros. Games, the first two of them had come out by this point, and those games sold so insanely, ridiculously well, just by making new 2D platformers in the old style, rehashing things. And clearly Sega was like, oh, we could do that with Sonic, let's do that too, and then we'll make a bajillion dollars with our game as well. Clearly that was the mentality going into the making of Sonic 4, because there were still 2D Sonic games coming out with the Advance games and the Rush games, but those were new 2D Sonic games that were doing new things, progressing 2D Sonic. That's not what this was about. This was about mining for nostalgia, being a new Super Mario Bros. Game for Sonic. So bring back all the old shit, you know, we have equivalents of Green Hill and Labyrinth and Casino Night and whatever. The first boss, Eggman has the Wrecking Ball like he does in Sonic 1. The last boss is basically the Death Egg Robot again from Sonic 2. The aesthetic is very much like the old games. It's just like new Super Mario Bros. How it would rehash the same level themes and level gimmicks and just recycle things from old Mario games, the Koopalings, this, that, the other. All stuff we're familiar with. That is what the real goal of Sonic 4 was. It was not to create the sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And honestly, I feel like that is a big part of the reason this game got so much hate when it first came out, and why it still has such a negative reception with a lot of Sonic fans. Just its name, the fact that it is Sonic 4, and how it's allegedly supposed to be the sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, even though it's clearly not. And that's not just me saying that, that is 100% true. This game was not intended to be Sonic 4. This game was originally created to be Sonic the Portable, which would just be a 2D Sonic game for mobile devices. And then probably somewhere along the lines, the marketing team was like, wait, we could put this on consoles, and if we market it as Sonic 4, then it'll have an even bigger splash, and we'll make all the money in the world. Unfortunately for them, that ended up backfiring, because no shit that a low-budget little mobile game is not gonna satisfy as the sequel to one of the most beloved Sonic games of all time. But to me, I'm like, okay, whatever. So this is not really Sonic 4, this is not the true sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, it doesn't deserve that title. Whatever, man, I really don't care. I'll just look at this game as a game, how about that? And when you do that, and you let go of the bias, and you look at Sonic 4 for what it is, you see that this game is actually still not very good at all. I probably wouldn't say it's an atrocious game, but a good game? Ooh, I don't think I could call it that. An okay game? Honestly, a mediocre game? Yeah, that feels a lot more appropriate to me. Before we get to core gameplay, let's actually talk about some of the more external things, like game structure and whatnot. So Sonic 4 is broken up into 2 episodes, although they're not really episodes. This isn't one game that was released episodically. It's very clear that Episode 2 is just another game. It's a sequel, it's the second game in the series, and these are just very small games. There is a little bit of connective tissue between them, but not really that much. Just like calling these games Sonic 4, it's just a marketing thing. Sonic 4 Episode 2 is a separate game, so we'll talk about that after we finish talking about Episode 1. And Episode 1, on the surface of it, mostly follows your typical Sonic game formula. You got zones and acts. This game we have 3 acts per zone, but there are only 4 zones in this game, which is a little bit lame. Still ends up being about the length of like Sonic 1 or 2 in terms of just playing through the game. But because there's only 4 zones, you spend a lot more time in these same couple of environments, so they kind of get old eventually. And the fact that all these zones are just straight up direct rehashes of zones from previous Sonic games does not help at all. I mean, you know, they're technically different. This isn't Green Hill, it's Splash Hill. This isn't Metropolis, it's Mad Gear Zone. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, buddy, whatever. Again, it's just doing that new Super Mario Bros. Thing. No new ideas allowed, only things from older Sonic games. Case in point, the special stages. You access them in the Sonic 1 method, and then the special stages themselves are effectively a rehash of the special stages from Sonic 1, though they are slightly different in that the stage does not automatically rotate and you control Sonic. Now it's the other way around. Sonic just falls on his own and you can't steer him at all. Instead, you control the rotation of the stage, which, again, just like New Super Mario Bros., it's technically different, sort of, a little bit, but ultimately it's pretty much the same thing as something from the original games. And I already didn't like the special stages in Sonic 1, and I don't really like them here. In fact, I'd say they're quite a bit more annoying in this game than they are in that game. So, off to a bad start. And of course we have bosses at the end of every zone, and in typical Sonic fashion, they're pretty whatever. But they lose extra points here for, once again, mostly just being rehashes of bosses from previous games. And you might say, well, hey, Pariah, you didn't give Sonic Generations guff for reusing things from previous games, but remember, in Sonic Generations, I said that that game takes old things and does new things with them, and enhances them in ways that we had never seen before. That is not the case here in Sonic 4. If we were taking old stuff and rehashing it, but now making it cooler and better and more interesting than in the original games, then okay, sure, I would be willing to give it a pass. But that's not what the Sonic 4 games do. They just take stuff directly from the previous games and either redo it almost one for one, or not as well as the original games that they're aping from. So from an originality perspective, they're not doing well at all, and from a perspective of just being good, they're struggling with that too. This is the wrong way to do nostalgia pandering, and I suspect it's a big part of why I find Sonic 4 to be so forgettable, because it's inferior to so many other Sonic games in literally every regard. And of course, that includes the most important aspect of the game, the gameplay, and this is where Sonic 4 fails the most at living up to its namesake. Because if you look at the original Sonic games and their progression from 1 to 2 to 3, each one was expanding on the Sonic formula, adding new things, improving the gameplay in various different ways. And Sonic 4 doesn't really do that. It does not continue the trajectory of the original 2D Sonic games. In a lot of ways, it actually regresses, removing things from previous games, and the things it does add are not really for the best. As an obvious example, Sonic is the only playable character in this game. We don't have Tails or Knuckles or anybody else, and you would think that the sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles should have, at the very least, the same amount of playable characters, if not more, rather than less playable characters. But of course, part of that is because Sonic 4 is the beginning of the no Sonic Friends era of Sonic. But there are other things here that are missing as well, like elemental shields or bosses at the end of every single act, even though I prefer that not being the case. I would also think that the sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles should be around the same length as that game, if not longer, and it should probably have a similar amount of zones, not less zones than even Sonic 1 had. These are the kinds of things that I would be looking for in the sequel to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But again, of course, this game is not really that, so it's not even really that worth it to talk about these things. Instead, let's just talk about Sonic 4 for what it is. And what it is a somewhat okay-ish facsimile of the original 2D Sonic gameplay. Once again, another big place where this game drops the ball in being a sequel to Sonic 3 is that it does not have the proper accurate physics from the original Genesis games, but to be fair, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with that on principle. At this point, I have talked about many a 2D Sonic game that do not have accurate physics. Between the 8-bit games, the Sonic Rush games, the Rivals games, classic Sonic in Generations, I don't need accurate classic Sonic physics in a 2D Sonic game to have a good time with the game. It just needs to have good physics that are fun and control well. And that is actually where Sonic 4 falls off. The issue here for me is not that these are not the correct physics. The issue is that these physics feel quite bad, like nowhere near the quality of Dimps' previous games, and it's really bizarre to me. Like, they had pretty good, accurate-feeling physics in Sonic Advance 1. Why didn't they just reuse the physics programming there? I get that it's, you know, a different system. This isn't a Game Boy Advance game, but you could recreate that, can't you? I assume maybe the people that made those physics weren't working at Dimps or weren't working on this game or something. It's really weird. Regardless of whatever happened during this game's development, we got the physics we got, and they really don't feel very good to me. On the surface of it, a couple things seem like they're okay, like Sonic does accelerate up to his speed, you got the spin dash, you can even do slope jumps and everything. But when you start to get into the nitty-gritty details, you notice that a lot of things don't really work correctly, or they work somewhat like how they're supposed to, but you can tell that they're like cheating things a little bit. Like slopes, it feels like in this game they only affect Sonic's acceleration or deceleration, but not his actual speed. So if you try to get up to speed while running up a hill, that's going to be more difficult. But if you're already up to speed and you just start running up a wall, it seems like you don't lose any speed at all. And similarly, it seems like running downhill doesn't really speed you up particularly. And rolling in this game seems like it's just terrible. You basically never want to be doing it. From what I can tell, it seems like all rolling does is slow you down in all contexts, even going downhill. And if that's going to be the case, if that's how the mechanic works in this game, then why can you even roll? What's even the point of it? This is a big problem with the physics of Sonic 4. It's not that they're different, it's not that they're not like the original games, it's that they are trying to be like the original games, but they don't work correctly, and so a lot of things feel off and wrong. Like, a big example is that when you're airborne in this game, the moment you let go of your horizontal movement, you instantly come to a dead stop. So you charge up for a big ol' spin dash jump, and you let it loose, and you just freeze there in the middle of the air. And it's like, what the fuck is that, man? The spin dash is not supposed to work this way. It is designed for the momentum to carry you so you can do big jumps. Plus, on top of all that, there's so much wonkiness to this game, just little oddities that you have to learn and get used to and figure out that this doesn't work the way you would expect it to, and so it feels really bad. Like, that's a really big issue with Sonic 4 to me. Beyond the functionality of it, the game just feels like trash when you first start playing it. Reminds me a lot of Sonic 06 in that regard, but you keep playing the game and you eventually get kind of used to it, and the game never starts to feel good, but you can kind of tolerate it. You know how this shit works, and you know what you're supposed to be doing, even though it feels wrong and bad. And unfortunately, the problems do not stop at the physics, because another thing that they've added to this game is the homing attack. And once again, to be fair, this is not the first 2D Sonic game to have the homing attack. Some of the advanced games had it, some of the Rush games had it, Colors for DS has it, the Rivals games have it. So it's not like the homing attack here is a particularly egregious sin for Sonic 4. Again, it's just one of those namesake things. Because it's Sonic 4, people take issue with it especially. But really, in truth, this is a problem that has been plaguing all of these 2D Sonic games, because the homing attack, I already don't like it in the 3D games, but in the 2D games, it's especially pointless because it's not that difficult to land on enemies, and it really doesn't have a practical function in these games most of the time. So that means the only use you ever really get out of the homing attack is when they specifically design the game to force you to use it, which in this game just means a bunch of lines of enemies that are just floating there and you have no option but to do the homing attack, which at the end of the day just boils down to repeatedly press the A button until you get to the end of the chain of enemies. It's stupid even when it is implemented correctly. The homing attack is absolutely unnecessary in 2D Sonic games, and I really don't think it adds anything of value at all, and this problem is not exclusive to Sonic 4, but I'm using this as my opportunity to talk about why I think it's bad and stupid and not really beneficial to any of these 2D Sonic games. Another issue I have with this game is a problem that you see in a lot of Dimps Sonic games from around this time. It feels like Sonic's base movement speed is way too fast. You go so quickly in this game that everything is coming at you completely blind. There's no way you can see what's happening. So you just have to take guesses at what to do or try to memorize all the level design. And yeah, sure, not being able to see has always been a part of 2D Sonic games, but it feels especially prominent here because Sonic's base speed is so ridiculously fast that you just can't see anything. And to make this problem even worse, in my opinion, the level design of Sonic 4 is really not very good. It follows typical Sonic level design rules pretty well, but the actual level design itself, the obstacles that you need to avoid, the platforming sequences that you need to complete, I just really don't find them very fun at all. This game has very little use of slopes in its level design, so there's not really a lot of opportunities for big cool slope jumps to, skip little sequences or jump off walls or things like that for cool things. There's a lot of homing attack chains just thrown around all over the place, which boil down to just mash the A button, which is really lame. A lot of the level design is very gimmick reliant, which yeah, Sonic levels always have their gimmicks to them, but they are integrated. They're part of the physics-based platforming gameplay. Here, there is less focus on that physics platforming stuff and a lot more focus on just pure gimmick-oriented design. Like in the Casino Night knockoff, which I forget the name of, you have these like cannons that you launch from, and so you get big sequences where it's just being launched from one cannon to the other, and all you have to do is line up the cannon so it shoots you off with the right trajectory, and the game explicitly doesn't want you to take control here or else you're gonna mess up the sequence. There's this one level in the Labyrinth Zone knockoff where you have a torch and it's dark and visibility gimmicks are always annoying, but then you have all these like puzzly things with it where you have to light up torches, which makes platforms move around, and then it's like, oh, light up the torches in the right sequence so you can go forward, and it's like, why am I doing this in a Sonic game? This is not what I play these games for. What are you doing? Or later in the same zone, you have these minecart sections, which are very basic Donkey Kong Country style. Just jump when you're supposed to jump, and that's the entire gameplay here. The Metropolis knockoff in this game has a lot of those gear running sequences that people didn't even like in Sonic 2, so I'm not exactly sure why you would bring those back, but they did. Lots and lots and lots of gameplay sequences like this in Sonic 4, and I'm just not really a fan of it. These are not great level gimmicks to me. They detract too much from the core Sonic gameplay that you want to be doing. An ideal Sonic gimmick is something that plays with the physics-oriented gameplay, not says, okay, let's stop doing that and let's do something else for a couple of seconds. It just doesn't really feel very good. It doesn't add to the flow in a very beneficial way, in my opinion. Plus, on top of that, we gotta talk about automation in Sonic 4. That's a pretty hot-button issue when it comes to this game. A lot of people complain about that, and I would say rightfully so. This game feels like it's taking a lot more of its design cues from 3D Sonic games than 2D Sonic games. But it does need to be said here, automation has always been a part of Sonic, even all the way back to the original game. But the thing is, in the original games, it was still reliant on the physics, and there was still room there for player input. You know, if you were going through a loop, you had to make sure you had enough speed to clear that loop, or else you would fall down. Whereas in stuff like the 3D games, they're always using dash panels and scripting to make sure you'll always get through, and we see that same kind of design here in Sonic 4. Dash panels all over the place, springs launching you left and right and up and down and all over. There are a lot of sequences in this game where it feels like you can just take your hands off the steering wheel and let the game do its thing. And again, stuff like this has always been in Sonic games, but here in Sonic 4, it feels a bit different, a bit weird. Like, if you look at the gameplay, there's a lot of run, and then like a spring launches you, and then you do a homing attack, and that's the part where you play, and then at the end of the chain, you hit a dash panel, and then you go through a loop, and some springs launch you around, and then there's like a platform you need to jump up to, and then there will be another dash panel that sends you through another whole bunch of things, and then you have a pulley that you homing attack onto. It feels like the actual gameplay is spread thin, and there's a lot of filler in these spectacle moments where you're literally doing nothing most of the time. So, all that being said, I think it's pretty obvious to say that I am not a fan of Sonic 4 Episode 1. But at the end of the day, I don't think this game is terrible. I definitely think that the negative reception of this game was way overblown. To me, this is just not very good. It's a very mediocre game, in my opinion. And for the most part, my biggest problem with Sonic 4 at a large, wide scale is that I think the game is just boring. It's just not that fun to play. The level design here is not very interesting. The moveset and the physics make it so the game isn't very fun to play inherently. And I just played through the game, and I'm like, yeah, it's a game, you play through it. It's kind of like a Sonic game, but not as good. Blah. And the fact that this game is essentially just a rehash of a bunch of shit from Sonic 1, it makes the whole thing so blasé to me. I'm just not interested. I'm not engaged in any capacity. I would prefer if this game was worse, because then I could hate it. Then I could have a miserable time with it. And that could at least be funny, perhaps, or at the very least, I'd feel something. But for the most part, when I play Sonic 4, I feel empty. I feel nothingness. I just feel like I want to stop playing. And before we move on to Sonic 4 Episode 2, let's talk about Sonic 4 Episode Metal. This is, lock-on technology, just like Sonic 3 and Knuckles. If you have both Sonic 4 Episode 1 and Sonic 4 Episode 2, then you unlock Sonic 4 Episode Metal, which is a prequel to Episode 2, where you play as Metal Sonic through a couple of remixed levels from Sonic 4 Episode 1, which should be a neat little thing if I wanted to play this game, but I don't, so it really ends up being just more mediocrity. And the level design here is not that significantly altered. It's kind of supposed to be like a hard mode version of the levels, but a lot of times you probably wouldn't even be able to tell the difference unless you were playing the two versions of the level back to back to see where they moved enemies and hazards and stuff around. But it ultimately ends up feeling very similar, and this only has one act per zone in Episode Metal, so it's extremely short. It's only 4 levels. So I guess it's a nice little bonus thing for people that got conned into buying both episodes of Sonic 4, but it's not really that worth playing if you ask me. Which means it fits into the bracket of Sonic 4 perfectly. Which, man, what a waste. This is one of the only times Metal Sonic has ever gotten a starring role in a Sonic game as a playable character, and this is what he gets. This character deserves better treatment, man, I swear. Anyway, on to Sonic 4 Episode 2, and this game is kind of interesting when you think about it, because Sonic 4 Episode 1 is not what that game was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a Sonic game for mobile devices that got turned into a console game, but Sonic 4 Episode 2 is different. They went into this game knowing that it would be a console thing. Now it is part of this Sonic 4 episodic whatever crap they're trying to make this into. And you can see the differences in the production affecting how this game turned out, and in many ways it is definitely for the better. The first thing that immediately jumps out at you is that this game looks a lot better than Sonic 4 Episode 1, because Jesus Christ, that first game was fucking hideous. And this game isn't great looking, but it's certainly a big step up, for sure. Another big thing is that Tails has been added to this game, as this game pulls a lot of its stuff from Sonic 2, but it also means that this game can have a 2-player mode, which definitely would not have been possible in Episode 1 when that was supposed to be a mobile game. So, you know, there's lots of cool little stuff like that that you can see how this is now designed and built to be Sonic 4 Episode 2, unlike the first game. And Sonic 4 Episode 2 clearly tries to address a lot of the criticisms and issues people had with the first game. For example, the physics have been improved in this game. They're not that dramatically better than the previous game, but they have been adjusted. Like, your momentum does carry now when you do, like, a spin dash jump or whatever, so that is nice. It is definitely a better feeling game. Still ultimately does feel very much like Sonic 4, but better, so, okay, improvements are good. And this game attempts to be slightly more original than Sonic 4 Episode 1 did, but not hugely so. Like, Episode 1 was clearly aping off of Sonic 1, and Episode 2 here is obviously aping off of Sonic 2 quite a bit, but it also apes off of Sonic CD, and it does try to rearrange things slightly more than not at all to make something that feels ever so slightly original. Like the first zone of the game, Sylvania Castle, it's obviously very based off of Aquatic Ruin from Sonic 2, but it's more of a castle-y theme, so it's like, okay, that is marginally different. And you have Oil Desert, which it's Oil Ocean, but it's in a desert now. That makes it different, right? It's not just the exact same thing. And you're like, yeah, I mean, technically it's a little bit different, but really? Is that the best you can do? What if you made just entirely original new zones instead? But of course, that's not going to happen because, as I've already stated, the real purpose of these games is not to be Sonic 4, it's to be the new Super Mario Bros. Of Sonic, which means rehashing shit is all they're allowed to do. Though I will give the game this, at least, when it comes to originality. All of the bosses in this game are original, they're not just, you know, remixes of bosses from Sonic 2 and CD or anything, so that's something. But to really give Sonic 4 Episode 2 credit where it's due, I gotta say, I kinda dig the special stages in this game. Unsurprisingly, they're the half-pipe from Sonic 2, which they've reused like 6 times at this point. But they have actually altered the design here and made it quite a bit different, and I think a lot of the additions to this special stage formula here are really cool and fun. For one thing, they've added a run button, so instead of just going at the base speed, if you want, if you're feeling up to it, you can hold the run button and speed these special stages up dramatically, which makes them a lot harder and more fun to play. And because this isn't 3D, you can actually see what's ahead of you, so there's not really visibility issues like in the original Sonic 2 stages. And they've added a lot of new layers to these kinds of special stages. Like, for example, they have springs that will shoot you to different tracks, so there are multiple routes you can take through these special stages, some of which are going to have more coins than others. Sometimes a half pipe will turn into a full pipe or a corkscrew, so you can run on the ceiling. There's this power-up where a tether forms between you and Tails, and you can collect any coins that get caught into the tether, so you can try to coordinate with the AI to spread the tether out as wide as you can to collect as many coins as possible, and that's all really cool stuff, honestly. These special stages are actually pretty fun, some of my favorites they've ever done in this half-pipe style, so credit where it's due, I actually quite like the special stages in Sonic 4 Episode 2. They're actually my favorite part of the whole Sonic 4 experience. And yeah, the special stages are my favorite part of this game because I still do not like the core gameplay of Sonic 4 Episode 2. A lot of people, I think, like this game more than the first Sonic 4, but personally, I actually like the first one more. I think this is quite a downgrade from the first game. And a big part of that comes from the new Tails tag actions that have been introduced into this game. On paper, I like the idea of this, using Tails as a partner to grant you new abilities to add some more depth to the platforming. I think that's a really cool idea. You know, Sonic Advance 3 did that kind of thing, and it was super awesome there. But here, the implementation of it is so stupid. So, like Sonic Advance 3, you have 2 tag actions you can do with Tails, one for the ground and one in the air. And as you would expect, the one in the air is that Tails will carry you around and allow you to fly. Sure, that makes perfect sense. But what I really don't like about these tag actions is there's this big screen freeze that happens anytime you activate one, and these abilities are quite useful, so it's pretty common that you end up using them in quick succession, one right after the other, which means you're constantly dealing with these screen freezes, and it really fucks with the pacing of the game. I don't know what they were thinking with these. I assume this was done for the co-op mode, so if one player wants to do a tag action, they'll automatically call the other player to them, and the screen freeze enables that to happen. But there's gotta be a better way to go about this. Like, Sonic Advance 3 also had a co-op mode, and it had the thing where you, like, hold the button and bring the partner to you, and that worked just fine, and it didn't require a stupid screen freeze. What it ultimately ended up resulting in is I tried to avoid using tag abilities as much as possible, not because I didn't like them or not because they weren't useful, but because the screen freeze was just so pace-breaking, it ruined the fun of the game. Though I will also say I didn't like to use them because the ground tag action is, in fact, fucking stupid. What happens for some reason, I don't know why they thought of this, but Sonic and Tails start 69ing each other, and they basically just launch off at maximum speed instantly, and they will automatically move forward with a lot of acceleration, and you can't do shit during this. You can't control them at all, they just go forward. And this is just so stupid to me because it makes the problems from the previous Sonic 4 even worse now. Some of my biggest issues at that game was moving too fast, moving at maximum speed all the time, and how little player input was necessary for a lot of that game's sequences. And now you have a literal button that does those exact things for you whenever you want. This move is just stupid, and the flying, while that's not stupid, that makes a lot of sense, I still have an issue with it in that it forces you to essentially play easy mode, because in the original Sonic games, Tails' flight was something to make him easier to play than Sonic, but if you wanted to play on the normal difficulty, then you would play as Sonic, which meant that if you screwed up a jump, you would fall down. But now this game, you have access to flight all the time, no matter what, so if you ever screw up a jump or anything, you can just pull out Tails and get you back up. And that's something I'm not really a fan of. And you could say, well, Pariah, just don't use these moves, but you can't. You have to use them. They are incorporated into the level design. There are many sections where you're required to use these abilities. These aren't like optional little advanced moves that players can mess around with if they want. These are part of the game's core design, and I'm not a big fan of that. It's also worth mentioning that I find Sonic 4 Episode 2 to be very clunky in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot of things in this game that do not work super well, and these abilities are part of it, like the flight. Like, sometimes Tails will land on a platform, but Sonic doesn't, so you fall down, or annoying weird things like that happens a lot in this game. So while in some ways they have kind of improved the gameplay of Sonic 4 compared to the first game, in other ways they've actually made it worse, and personally I find this game to be less fun to play than the first game, which already wasn't even that fun to begin with. On top of that, the level design of this game I also feel is worse than the previous Sonic 4, which is almost impressive. It ranges from level design that is relatively on par with the first game, which is still fairly low for Sonic standards, to really bad, in my opinion. The Wing Fortress knockoff in this game in particular, I thought this zone's level design was pretty atrocious, honestly. There is such a lack of clarity on what you're supposed to be doing sometimes that killed me over and over and over again. And of course, this game aping off of Sonic 2, we got Wing Fortress, so you know what that means. We need a Sky Chase level, and oh my god, this Sky Chase level is the worst one in the entire franchise. Holy shit, this level fucking sucks. I already didn't like the original Sky Chase in Sonic 2. I didn't like the Sky Chase in Sonic Adventure either, but this one is impressive in how terrible it is. Not only is it a slow, boring-ass auto-scroller, but the functionality of so many things here is awful. Like, remember these turtle enemies from Sonic 2, and you could jump on them and run around on them for a little bit? Is whatever, fine, who cares? But here in Sonic 4 Episode 2, Tails can get stuck on these things, and so if you jump on one and then jump forward expecting Tails to be there to catch you, oh sorry, he's busy, fuck you, you die. My god, this level is so fucking terrible. And then you have a boss fight using this terrible flight gameplay, and it's really unclear and obtuse what you're supposed to do, and it took me fucking forever, and oh my god, it's so bad. Sonic 4 Episode 1 to me was just like bleh, whatever, but Sonic 4 Episode 2, oh my god, this game fucking sucks. Oh, but Pariah, the name of the series is Sonic Was Always Good. Yeah, well, you know what? There's exceptions to everything. Fuck this game. In fact, here's another thing that shows how bad this game. I didn't mention it before, but in both these games you can get Super Sonic, and in Sonic 4 Episode 1 he works like you would expect, invincibility, faster speed, higher jump, all that stuff. And Sonic 4 Episode 2 has Supersonic as well, and it grants you the same abilities, but it's worse in this game because, for some stupid fucking reason, you cannot use Supersonic while doing tag actions. So anytime you need Tails for any of those tag abilities, you transform back into normal Sonic, which harms the pacing even more because you have to go through the transformation sequence every single time you finish using these tag abilities if you want to play as Supersonic. Fucking Christ, man, can they get anything right with this goddamn game? Honestly, it's kind of baffling to me that a lot of fans say that 4 Episode 2 is better than Episode 1. I think people are just like, they improved the physics, so that means the game is better. No, that does not mean that. This game is definitely worse than 4 Episode 1. This is, by far, the worst Sonic game that I have covered so far in the entire series. I hate this game. I think it is awful. But one last thing before we go is, of course, as always, I need to discuss Time Attack, because you know what? There have been instances in the past sometimes where I'm not really feeling a Sonic game, but maybe the Time Attack can save it. Maybe that can actually make the game fun. When you start playing well, when you learn the levels, does that actually result in a good time here? And I'll be honest, I tried. I really did, with all the Sonic 4s, and it's just not good, because the gameplay in these games is mediocre at best. The level design is not that good, not that interesting, not that fun. It boils down to mostly just memorization, because you can't see shit of what's coming up. I really did try to give this game a fair shake with Time Attack, but I just don't like it. Sonic 4 in general, it's just not very good. The whole package, I think, is very easy to skip on, unless you absolutely insist on playing every single Sonic game ever made, like me. I do not recommend playing any of the Sonic 4s at all, especially today. These games have no purpose anymore. If you want a newer classic Sonic 2D experience, we have Mania, we have Superstars, both of which are dramatically better than this game. There really is just nothing to get out of Sonic 4 anymore. I know a lot of people have criticized Sonic Superstars as being Sonic 4 Episode 3, but let me tell you, coming back to these games, no. That game is definitely much better than Sonic 4, no doubt about it. And by the way, in case anyone's wondering, I'm not doing story videos for these games because they don't have any story, there's nothing to talk about, so we're just gonna pass over them. And that's it for Sonic 4. Thank God, done talking about these games. Now I can take solace in the knowledge that I am never going to play either of these games ever again in my entire life. And I am very, very okay with that.